Al-Qaeda and ISIL and groups like it are desperate for legitimacy. We must never accept the premise that they put forward, because it is a lie. Nor should we grant these terrorists the religious legitimacy that they seek. They are not religious leaders, they're terrorists.
Well, the president today in a counterterrorism summit, a violent extremist summit, they called it, at the White House, also followed up after an op-ed he wrote in the Los Angeles Times. He said this today as well, but he wrote it this way: efforts to counter violent extremism will only succeed if citizens can address legitimate grievances through the democratic process and express themselves through strong civil societies, which prompted questioning at the White House.
What would the legitimate grievances of either ISIS or any other extremist group be?
And I don't have the op-ed in front of me, but I believe that's actually a reference to the efforts of the administration and obviously local law enforcement and other community leaders here in this country to prevent ISIL from succeeding in recruiting and inspiring people to join their fight.
With that, let's talk about it all with our panel. Tucker Carlson, host of Fox & Friends Weekend. Ron Fournier, senior political columnist of National Journal, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Tucker, you saw and heard what the president said today. Thoughts overall?
Well, their unwillingness to call it what it is not only annoying on a semantic level, though it is, it suggests a deep unseriousness. They're not willing to think through what the problem is and how to address it. His claim that what people really need is to feel heard suggests they haven't thought about the lessons of the Arab Spring. I mean, the populations of all kinds of countries in the Middle East were heard during the Arab Spring, and dictators were deposed. And what happened? The area got more chaotic. So they're not serious about this, A. B, he spent as much time in his op-ed chastising Christians for their intolerance as he did Muslims. He named a couple of isolated incidents where mentally ill Christians shot individuals, as if that's the same as an Islamic cult taking over, in effect, an entire country in the middle of the Middle East. They just don't understand what the problem is intentionally, and I think it's troubling.
Ron, I commend two people, and I know people have been finding it, this piece in The Atlantic by a contributor, Graham Wood. It's called What ISIS Really Wants. You can link to it through my blog on the website. But he writes, in addition to a long, detailed piece, the reality is that the Islamic State is Islamic, very Islamic. Yes, it has attracted psychopaths and adventure seekers drawn largely from the disaffected populations of the Middle East and Europe, but the religion preached by its most ardent followers derives from coherent and even learned interpretations of Islam. He goes on to say President Obama's misstatements about ISIS, quote, reflected confusion about the group and may have contributed to significant strategic errors.
Yeah, he went on to say, this is a line that really captured my attention, that it's an authentic throwback to early Islam, and it's faithfully reproducing its norms of warfare. I mean, this is an apocalyptic, end of days type death cult that we really have to take seriously. The president obviously has got to get in front of this language. It is annoying that he's not saying what it actually is. For a second, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, though, if I can go that far. I don't think it necessarily shows a lack of seriousness. As a matter of fact, a lot of what he was saying today about the root causes being poverty and we have to be careful that we don't make this an us versus them holy war, our language right out of President Bush in 2002 and 2003. My problem is, while we're talking about the language and we're having this argument over the language, and he's allowing and enabling this argument over the language, what we're not getting to is how do we kill these folks? How do we eradicate it? I'm less interested in how we talk about them than how we kill them. And right now, we don't have a coherent strategy. And that's what I would rather us be debating, both the president and Republicans.
Tomorrow's summit apparently is supposed to address some of that. We'll see. Charles, what about this overview? First of all, a lot of the terrorists in 9/11 came from rich families, including Osama bin Laden, who's the son of a billionaire. But besides that, what about this overall take on ISIS?
Well, look, it's the president himself who called the three-day summit. And it sounds like a community organizer talking about outreach to aggrieved communities. If you listen to the president today and his emphasis on Islamic grievances, on reaching out, on making Muslims feel comfortable and not excluded, you would think that we are responding to the execution, the beheading of 21 Muslims on behalf of 21 extreme Christians somewhere in the world. It is so divorced from reality, as if the problem is the lack of understanding of Muslim grievances, particularly in the Middle East. We talk about root causes as if that's going to make any difference whatsoever. There are rich people in ISIS, there are poor, they're educated, they're uneducated. The idea that somehow if you can attack, you can eradicate poverty, which in and of itself is an absurdity, is going to make any difference, is sort of a fantasy. And it's a way to avoid the issue, as is the president's language. I mean, he said, I don't want to legitimize these people by using the word Islamist. It's as if you refuse to call Nazis Nazis because they were not authentic socialists and they had a perverted idea of nationalism. I mean, you simply have to say, of course they are a branch of Islam, a very important one. They are all over the world, and unless you address the Islamic roots of it, you will get absolutely nowhere in trying to stop the recruiting and to stop their advances.
Let's take the semantics thing off the table. Let's just say the president starts calling them radical Islam. Are there targets now that they can do militarily from the air? Do they need to say, you know what, we need special ops on the ground to go after these guys? And we have Marines a few hundred miles away from a town in Iraq that has just been overtaken by ISIS.
I don't know there's too much debate about that, actually. I think everyone wants to see those 300 Marines, the ones you're referring to, in the training mission protected. I think Democrats, many in Congress, agree that we probably need to add advisors or troops to the ground. I am so struck, though, by the president's inability to think this through. People are not joining ISIS because they are poor, because they've been victims of injustice. They're joining ISIS because they're searching for meaning. The secular mind has a lot of trouble understanding that. This does need to be fought on the level of ideas, of the level of ideology. Saudi Arabia and Egypt have the best regarded Sunni theologians, clerics in the world. Why wouldn't the president address this as a religious problem, pressure those governments to pressure their clerics to declare this kind of stuff out of bounds for faithful Muslims? That would be a really effective, potentially, step to take. But if you don't acknowledge it as a religious problem, you're not going to do that.
And the irony is that Egypt itself,
exactly,
the president
exactly
addressed the clerics of his country, knowing it's the center of Islamic scholarship and religion, and he's the one who said we have to have a reformation. And here's the president essentially contradicting the Egyptians.
Because he knows more about Islam.
But here we are again. We're talking about his language, which again, I can read you some quotes.
It's about his ideas, it's not his language.
But when we press people, what would you do? What could we do more? We run up against the problem of who really wants to commit a lot more ground troops in the country.
Not a lot more, but let's say special ops was unleashed to target or work with indigenous forces. Why is that not even being discussed? Why is the line drawn?
First of all, I don't know that it's not being discussed. I don't even know that it's not being done now.
But even before you talk about boots on the ground, why are the Kurds not getting the weaponry they need? They are not getting it out of Baghdad. They're not getting it from us. Why were the Jordanians running low on ammunition in their runs against ISIS? Why is it that the Kurds and the Jordanians, and now what we hear is that the Free Syrian Army, the non-radical rebels in Syria, we are beginning the training. The civil war has been on for 4 years and we're beginning the training. Forget about American active involvement now. Why has none of this been happening by people who want to fight?
That is the strongest case, and those are the questions that I want asked and answered.
And we'll keep asking them. Next up, how foreign policy figures in the 2016 presidential race this early.